The rain was coming down hard that morning, the kind that turns the road into a gray blur and makes you want to keep driving no matter what. I almost did. I had my hands tight on the wheel, my old Ford pickup rattling the way it always did, Sophie's voice still echoing in my head from breakfast. I promised I would be back before dinner. Then I saw her car. A black BMW sat crooked on the shoulder of the interstate, hazard lights blinking through the rain, smoke curled out from under the hood, thin but angry. Traffic rushed past without slowing. I felt that familiar pull in my chest, the one that told me to stop even when logic said to keep going. I sighed, flipped on my blinker, and pulled over behind her. I stepped out into the rain, my boots hitting wet gravel. She was sitting inside, hands frozen on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead like if she moved, everything might fall apart. When I knocked lightly on the window, she jumped. I took a step back and kept my hands where she could see them. I knew how this looked. A stranger in a beat-up truck, rain pouring down, interstate roaring around us. I spoke calmly. I said good morning and asked if she was okay. She cracked the window just a bit. Her eyes were sharp but scared. She told me the car died. She had a meeting downtown, something important, something she could not miss. Her voice shook when she said it. I told her my name was Daniel. I told her I worked with engines most of my life and asked if I could take a look. She hesitated, then nodded. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the smoke. Maybe it was the clock ticking loud in her head. She unlocked the door. When she stepped out, I noticed how out of place she looked there. Her coat was clean, her shoes polished, her hair pulled back tight like control itself. The rain soaked through all of that in seconds. She introduced herself as Laura. I popped the hood and steam rushed up into my face. I didn't mind. I rolled up my sleeves and leaned in, listening, touching, reading the engine the way I always had. Engines made sense to me. They followed rules. People were harder. Cars flew past us, spraying water. I asked her to turn the key. I checked hoses and clamps. I could feel her watching me, not impatient, curious, like she was seeing a world she never stepped into before. I worked slow and steady. I wasn't thinking about time. I was thinking about Sophie, about being done in time to pick her up, about how helping strangers was something my wife used to believe in, about how stopping felt like the right thing, even when life kept pushing me forward. After a long while, I closed the hood and told Laura to try again. She turned the key. The engine came alive, smooth and strong. Her face changed instantly. Relief flooded her like air after being underwater. She laughed, then almost cried. She said I saved her. She reached into her purse and pulled out cash, holding it toward me like she needed to pay this moment away. I shook my head. I didn't want her money. I never did. I told her I was just glad to help. She looked surprised, like that answer didn't fit the world she lived in. Then I admitted I hadn't eaten yet, and that my daughter was probably already wondering where I was. Her expression softened. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in paper. Turkey and avocado. She offered it like it was nothing, like it didn't matter. But it did. I took it. I thanked her. I meant it. Before she left, she handed me a business card. She said if I ever needed anything, I should call. I tucked it into my pocket without thinking much of it. Life had taught me not to expect doors to open just because someone said they might. She drove off, taillights fading into the rain. I stood there a moment longer, eating the sandwich, watching traffic rush by. I felt warm in a way I hadn't in a long time. I didn't know then that this small stop, this wet morning, this shared silence on the side of the road was about to change everything for me and for Sophie. I only knew that sometimes you stop because your heart tells you to, and sometimes the road gives you more than you ever planned to take. I thought that would be the end of it. A broken car, a sandwich, a thank you carried away by the rain. Most days in my life end quietly like that. I went on, picked Sophie up from school, listened to her talk about spelling tests and lunchroom drama, and told myself it was just another good deed folded into an ordinary day. But that night, after Sophie fell asleep, I found the business card in my pocket. Laura Bennett. Harbor Line Motors. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Harbor Line was not just another company. It was one of the biggest names in the industry, the kind of place I used to dream about before life turned in directions I never planned. I slid the card back into my drawer and shut it. That life was behind me. Or so I told myself. The next morning, there was a knock at my door. I opened it, still holding a coffee mug, and there she was, Laura. No rain this time, just her standing in the narrow hallway of my apartment building, looking uncertain but determined. My heart jumped in my chest. She said my name like she had practiced it. She apologized for showing up without calling. She said she could not stop thinking about me. That was the first time I felt it, that strange pull, the feeling that something bigger than coincidence was unfolding. She stepped inside, her eyes moving around the apartment, the stacked books, the small table, the crayon marks Sophie never quite cleaned up. She noticed everything, but she did not judge. That mattered more than she knew. Sophie came out of her room then, rubbing her eyes. Laura knelt down to greet her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sophie liked her right away. That also mattered. Laura told me what she had done after leaving the highway, how she could not let it go, how she looked me up, how she learned about my past at Summit Engineering, about my patents, about Anna. Hearing my wife's name from a stranger's mouth caught me off guard. It tightened my chest in that familiar way. Pain mixed with love, loss mixed with gratitude. Laura didn't push. She spoke gently. She said she understood why I left. She said Harbor Line was building something different now. Flexible work, room for family, a place where I would not have to choose between being an engineer and being a father. I told her no. The word came out faster than I expected. Firm, protective. I told her Sophie was my priority. That world took too much. It always did. Laura nodded, but she didn't argue. She listened. Then she looked at Sophie. Sophie asked if I would get to build cars again. That simple question hit harder than any pitch Laura could have made. Laura told me I wouldn't have to decide that day. She asked for one interview. Just one. She said I owed myself that much. Sophie tugged at my hand and said she wanted me to be happy. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about engines and deadlines and meetings, about the man I was before, about the man I became, about whether the two could exist in the same body. In the morning, I said yes to the interview. Walking into Harbor Line felt like stepping into a past life. Glass walls, clean lines, sharp minds moving fast. I felt out of place in my borrowed suit. But once the questions started, something inside me clicked back on. They asked about systems, efficiency, cooling, batteries. I stood up, grabbed the marker, and started drawing. Lines and numbers poured out of me like they had been waiting for years. I forgot about being nervous. I forgot about time. I remembered who I was. When the meeting ended, they shook my hand and told me they'd be in touch. Laura walked me out with a smile that told me everything without saying it. That evening, I told Sophie about the offer. I told her it would change things. She listened quietly, then smiled and said we would still have pancakes on Saturdays. That was all I needed. I accepted the job. The weeks that followed were a blur. New routines, new energy. Sophie adjusted better than I expected. Laura stayed close, not just as my boss, but as someone who cared. Coffee breaks turned into long talks. Work talk turned into life talk. One night after Sophie fell asleep, Laura stayed longer than usual. We sat in silence for a moment that felt heavy but safe. She looked at me and said she was glad she broke down that morning. I knew then this was no longer just about a job. Something else was growing between us. Quiet, real, built the same way everything strong is built, one small act at a time. And I could feel it, that this road was only just beginning. The first few months at Harbor Line moved fast, faster than I remembered. Projects stacked up, meetings filled my calendar. But this time it was different. I left the office before the sun went down most days. I made it to school pickups. I still cooked dinner, still took Sophie in every night. For the first time since Anna passed, life felt full instead of heavy. The project they gave me was big, a new electric sedan, one that needed a battery system no one had managed to perfect yet. That challenge woke something inside me. Late at night, after Sophie was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table sketching ideas on scrap paper. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Laura believed in me from the start, not the loud, showy kind of belief, the quiet kind. She defended my ideas in meetings. She made space for my voice. When doubt crept in, hers never did. Outside of work, she slipped into our lives naturally. She came to Sophie's school events, helped with homework, sat on the floor building puzzles without checking her phone. Sophie adored her, and I could see why. I tried to keep my heart in check. I told myself this was just trust, just respect. But the way Laura looked at Sophie, the way she listened to me, the way she stayed even when she did not have to, chipped away at walls I had built carefully over time. The prototype launch came faster than expected. Cameras, applause, headlines. My design worked, better than anyone predicted. When the room erupted in cheers, I didn't look at the executives. I looked at Sophie. She was in the front row, smiling like I had just given her the whole world. That night, we celebrated at home. Pizza on the living room floor. Laura laughed like she belonged there, like she always had. When Sophie fell asleep with her head on Laura's lap, something shifted inside my chest. After I carried Sophie to bed, Laura and I stood in the quiet kitchen. The house felt warm, safe. She told me she admired the man I was, not just the engineer, but the father. I told her I was afraid of loving again, afraid of replacing what could never be replaced, afraid of breaking Sophie's heart if things changed. Laura listened. Then she said she was not here to replace anyone. She was here to build something new, at a pace that felt right. That was the night I kissed her. It was soft, careful, full of things neither of us said out loud. It felt like hope. Weeks turned into months. The company grew. The project expanded. I was promoted. The title felt unreal, but the work felt right. Laura and I learned each other's rhythms, the good days, the quiet ones, the hard ones. One evening, Sophie asked if Laura was going to stay with us forever. The question caught us both off guard. Laura looked at me, not answering for me, letting me decide. I knelt in front of Sophie and told her that grown-ups take time, that love doesn't rush, but that some people choose to stay. Sophie smiled and hugged Laura without another word. That night, Laura cried quietly in my arms. A year later, Harborline held its biggest celebration yet. I stood on stage accepting an award I never imagined I would earn again. When I looked out, I saw Laura beside Sophie, both of them smiling with a pride that reached deep into my bones. I realized then that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. Life did not become perfect. It never does. There were late nights, sick days, missed plans. But there was balance, and more importantly, there was love. I was no longer just surviving. I was building a future, one careful choice at a time. And it all traced back to that rainy morning, the moment I chose to stop instead of drive past. I didn't know it then, but that decision had already brought my family home. The morning light filled our kitchen softly, the kind that makes everything feel calm before the day begins. Sophie sat at the table swinging her legs, humming to herself while I flipped pancakes on the stove. Laura stood beside me, slicing fruit, her hair still loose from sleep. Moments like this used to feel impossible. Now they felt like home. Life had settled into a rhythm I never thought I would have again. Work mattered, but it didn't consume me. Family came first, and Harborline respected that. Laura made sure of it. Not because it was policy, but because she believed in it, because she lived it with us. Sophie had grown stronger too, happier. She laughed more. She talked about her mom without that tightness in her voice. One night, as I tucked her in, she told me she thought her mom sent Laura to us. I didn't argue. Some things don't need logic. The company continued to rise. Our battery design became the standard others tried to copy. Reporters wanted interviews, awards came and went, but what mattered most to me happened quietly, away from boardrooms and cameras. One evening, after Sophie fell asleep, Laura and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees. The air was still, peaceful. She reached for my hand and told me she loved me. The words didn't scare me like I thought they would. They felt warm, familiar, like something I had been holding my breath for. I told her I loved her too, not as a promise to the future, not as a replacement for the past, but as a choice, a steady one. Months later, I asked Sophie how she would feel if Laura lived with us all the time. Sophie didn't hesitate. She said the house already felt like it was hers. Laura moved in slowly, a few boxes at first, a toothbrush, books on the shelf. Eventually, her laughter filled every room. We didn't rush marriage. We didn't need to. What we had was built on trust, patience, and quiet understanding, on showing up every day, even when it was hard. 1 year after that rainy morning, Harborline held its annual gala. A room full of lights, applause, polished speeches. I stood on stage again, thanked people who helped me get there. But when it was over, I stepped away from the crowd. Laura found me by the window. Sophie ran into my arms. That's when I understood it fully. Success wasn't the title on my badge. It wasn't the applause. It wasn't the recognition. It was a little girl who no longer felt alone. It was a woman who saw me when I was just a man in worn jeans on the side of the road. It was a family rebuilt not through grand plans, but through simple kindness. Later that night, back at home, Sophie asked if we could make sandwiches the next day, the same kind Laura gave me on the highway. She said sandwiches were lucky. Laura laughed. I smiled. Sometimes life doesn't change because you plan it well. Sometimes it changes because you stop, because you help, because you accept help when it's offered. I didn't set out to fix a life that morning. I just fixed a car. But kindness has a way of coming back bigger than you expect. For me, it came back as a family. And every time it rains, I remember that the most important turns in life happen when you least expect them.